Good evening, everyone. Today starts the first time that I will be reading to you. I love to read, but I can't seem to stay awake when I do it. But when I read out loud, I can. And I really want to read this book. So join me and sit back as I read to you that It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism by Senator Bernie Sanders. Introduction. Capitalism is the problem. They say the older you get, the more conservative you become. Well, that's not me. The older I get, the angrier I become about the uber capitalistic system under which we live. And the more I want to see transformational change in our country. Some people think it's un-American to ask hard questions about where we are as a nation and where we're heading. I don't. To my view, there's nothing more American than questioning the systems that have failed us, demanding the changes we need in order to create the kind of society that we and future generations deserve. Here is a simple, straightforward reality. The uber capitalist economic system that has taken hold in the United States in recent years, propelled by uncontrollable greed and contempt for human decency, is not merely unjust. It is grossly immoral. We need to confront that immorality. I take that out. We need to confront that immorality boldly, bluntly, without apology. It is only then we can begin to transform a system that is rigged against the vast majority of Americans and is destroying millions of lives. Confronting that reality and mobilizing people to bring about the transformational change we need is not easy. That's why I've written this book. We need not only to understand the powerful forces that hold us down today, but equally important, to have a vision as to where we want to be in the future. It is my strong belief that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, with exploding technological progress that will greatly increase worker productivity, we can finally end austerity economics and achieve the long-sought human dream of providing a decent standard of living for everyone. In the 21st century, we can end the vicious dog-eat-dog economy in which the vast majority struggle to survive, while a handful of billionaires have more wealth than they could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. Excuse me. The oligarchs own America. Let's be clear. While the middle class continues to decline, the system we have today is doing extremely well for the people who own it. These oligarchs have enormous wealth. They have enormous power. In fact, for the 1%, things have never been better. They have their mansions all over the world, their private islands, their expensive art, their yachts, their private jets. Some of them have spaceships that someday may take them to Mars. Imagine that. These oligarchs like the way things are going, and with unlimited resources at their disposal, will do everything possible to defend what they have and maintain the status quo. Yes, we live in a democracy, but they own that democracy. They spend tens of billions of dollars on campaign contributions to both major political parties in order to buy politicians who will do their bidding. They spend billions more on lobbying firms to influence governmental decisions at the federal, state, and local levels. That is why over the last 50 years, we have consistently seen public policy that benefits the very rich at the expense of everyone else. Yes, we have freedom of speech and a free press, but to a significant degree, the oligarchs own that media. That's why the personalities they employ on TV, radio, newspapers, and social media do not ask embarrassing questions and rarely raise issues that will undermine the privileged position of their employers. That's why, despite the many thousands of television networks, radio stations, and websites they own, there is little public discussion about the power of corporate America and how oligarchs wield that power to benefit their interest at the expense of working families. The good news is that while the oligarchs and the institutions they control work frantically to maintain the status quo, we are now beginning to see cracks in the system. Millions of Americans are starting to look at the society in which they live from a new and different perspective. They're beginning to think big, not small. They're asking hard questions and demanding answers that take them beyond the incremental politics and mainstream ideology of today. Many of them are finding answers in union organizing as they seek a greater say in their workplaces, along with better wages, benefits, and working conditions. Taking on the economic and political establishment. I know a little bit about all of this, having run two of the most progressive grassroots campaigns for president in modern American history. In 2016, my campaign shocked the political establishment by winning 22 states and more than 13 million votes in the Democratic primaries, where I took on the party's anointed candidate. That was not supposed to happen. That's not what big money interest wanted. That's not what the corporate media wanted. That's not what super PACs and wealthy campaign contributors wanted. That's not what the super delegates wanted. But that's what happened. 4 years later, in 2020, we won the popular vote against a huge field of candidates in the first three Democratic primary states, Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. The result? A panicked political establishment came together behind Joe Biden, the one candidate they thought could beat us, and the other candidates were asked to drop out. The most important lesson of those campaigns was not just the list of states that we won as we took on the greed and recklessness of the ruling class, or the total number of votes we received. More important was where the votes were coming from. They were coming in overwhelming numbers from young people under 40, the future of our country. In state after state and in national polls, we won the support of young Americans by landslide proportions. These voters, Black, white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, understood their lived experience that America's uber capitalistic system was not working for them. It was not working for them economically, as they were experiencing a lower standard of living than their parents. It was not working for them from an environmental perspective, as they faced a planet that was growing increasingly unhealthy and uninhabitable as a result of climate change. It was not working for them in terms of ending the kinds of systemic racism, sexism, homophobia, and xenophobia they detested. During our campaign, millions of young people in this country made it clear they wanted change, real change. These Americans understand that proposals that tinker around the edges are an insufficient response to the enormous crisis we face. For them, there is a rapidly growing recognition that this country has a deep systematic problem, and that it is not good enough to deal only with the symptoms of the problem. We have got to get to the root causes. We have to confront the destructiveness of modern day uber capitalism. We have got to change the system. While polling shows that a majority of Americans still view capitalism favorably, the support level has been sliding steadily in recent years, dropping to well below 60% in an Axios Momentum survey conducted in June of 2021. Among Americans age 18 to 34, negative views about capitalism surged from 38% in 2019 to 49% just 2 years later. Among Gen Z adults, those Americans age 18 to 24 who are getting their education and looking to enter the job market, 54% say they have a negative view. The political reality of this moment in history, however, is not the need to fight for a more democratic, just, and humane society. Now is the time when, with all of our energy, we must oppose the reactionary and neo-fascist forces in this country that are undermining American democracy and moving us towards authoritarianism and violence as they scapegoat minorities and attempt to divide us based on our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, and our ethnicity. That is why, after I lost the Democratic nomination in 2020, I worked with the progressive movement to do everything we could to defeat Trump and elect Joe Biden as president. While Biden and I have very different political views, I have known him for years and consider him to be a friend and a very decent human being. During that campaign, which took place during the COVID pandemic, I organized dozens of live streams and rallies for Biden and Harris that were viewed by many hundreds of thousands of people. We also focused working with a number of grassroots organizations on voter registration and increasing voter turnout among young people, trade unionists, and non-traditional voters. And that worked. One of the reasons Biden won and Democrats did well in 2020 was the unprecedented turnout that we saw among new and younger voters. To the surprise of the pundits and the pollsters, much of the same thing happened in 2022 midterm elections, when overwhelming support from young voters helped Democrats to defy expectations and keep control of the Senate. Unfortunately, they lost the House, and with it, the ability to advance much of President Biden's agenda. In 2020 and again in 2022, I did my best to alert the American people that Trump was not a normal political figure, and that these were not normal elections. The 2020 campaign wasn't a clash of ideas. It was a battle over whether we would remain a democracy. Over and over again, I made it clear that Trump was not only a pathological liar and a despot, but that if he lost, it was unlikely he would abide by the Constitution, accept defeat, and leave office voluntarily. Tragically, the insurrection of January 6, 2021, and later disclosures made it abundantly clear that my concerns were justified, and that much of the National Republican Party has descended into right-wing, anti-democratic extremism. That was all the more evident in 2022, when Trump-backed election deniers ran in states across the country on the Republican line. It will remain true in 2024 as Trump again bids for his party's nomination in the presidency. Why people vote for Trump? One of the more disturbing aspects of the 2020 election was that while Biden won, Trump got 10 million more votes than he had received in 2016. He did especially well in white, rural, economically depressed parts of the country. Why? Why did working class people, many of them struggling economically, vote for Trump? Why was he able to hold rallies in the middle of nowhere that drew tens of thousands of enthusiastic followers? I know that some pundits and politicians respond to these questions by suggesting that all of Trump's supporters are racist, sexist, or homophobes, or that they really are deplorable and there's nothing to be done. Sorry, I don't agree. And I should know, I have been to almost every state in this country, and unlike corporate pundits, have actually talked with Trump supporters. Are some of them racist, sexist who voted for bigotry? Absolutely, but many are not. I think the more accurate answer as to why Trump has won working class support lies in the pain, desperation, and political alienation that millions of working class Americans now experience, and the degree to which the Democratic Party has abandoned them for wealthy campaign contributors and the beautiful people. These are Americans who, while the rich get much richer, have seen their real wages stagnate and their good union jobs go to China and Mexico. They can't afford health care. They can't afford childcare. They can't afford to send their kids to college and are scared to death about retirement with inadequate income. Because of what doctors call diseases of despair, their communities are even seeing a decline in life expectancy. Many of these voters have spent their lives playing by the rules. They worked hard, very hard, and did the best for their kids and their communities. During the worst of the pandemic, they didn't have the luxury of sitting behind a computer at home doing virtual work. They were putting their lives on the line in jobs in hospitals, factories, warehouses, public transportation, meat packing plants, and grocery stores. They kept the economy going, and many thousands of them died as a result. Many of these so-called racist Americans voted for Barack Obama, our first Black president, and for hope and change. And yes, we can. And they voted to reelect him, but their lives did not get better. After almost 50 years of wage stagnation, Democrats were in charge, but we did not raise wages for workers. After massive amounts of illegal corporate anti-union activity, we did not make it easier for workers to join unions. We did not improve job security. We did not address corporate greed or the massive levels of income and wealth inequality. We did not provide health care for all or lower the cost of prescription drugs. We did not make child care and higher education affordable. We did not address homelessness or the high cost of housing. We did not make it easier for working people to retire with security and dignity. We did not reform a corrupt campaign finance system. Today, Millions of Americans feel deep anger towards the political, economic, and media establishment. They look at Washington and the corporate media and see rejection and contempt. They see not only a government that is ignoring their needs, but politicians busy attending fundraisers and events with the rich who have no clue of what the lives of the great majority of Americans are about. The absurdity of the current day situation is that Trump, a phony, a pillar of the establishment, a billionaire, and an anti-worker businessman, has been able to fill that political vacuum and tap into the anger. Donald Trump, champion of the working class, beyond pathetic. Failing to build back better. Biden's inauguration in January 2021, the Democratic control of the House and Senate gave Democrats an opportunity to finally stand up for working families. And not a moment too soon. In the first months of 2021, the country faced an unprecedented public health and economic crisis. Thousands of people were dying every day from COVID. Millions had lost their jobs and were facing hunger and homelessness. Hospitals were understaffed and in crisis, and schools were closing. It was time to act, and to act boldly. As the newly elected chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, I was in a position to lead that effort. On March 6, 2021, after much work by the Budget Committee, the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan passed the Senate by a party line vote of 50 to 49. The final amended bill was passed by the House on March 10th and signed by the president on March 11th. This measure was one of the most comprehensive, consequential pieces of legislation in modern history. In the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, exploding unemployment, and economic desperation, this bill provided the much-needed assistance that working families and the state and local institutions desperately needed. The legislation was also extremely popular. In March of 2021, President Biden's approval rating stood at 59%, the highest of his presidency. The people saw that finally they had a government that was working on their behalf. Many of us understood that while the American Rescue Plan was an enormously important piece of emergency legislation, it was not enough. Now, with Democratic control of the White House, the Senate, and the House, we had the opportunity to address the long-term structural crisis that faced working people. The Budget Committee worked with the White House and members of Congress to put together proposals to be called Build Back Better, a comprehensive reconciliation bill that would have done more for working families than any piece of legislation in the last 80 years. It was truly transformative in nature and had wide public support. Tragically, that bill never made it to the floor. In a 50-50 Senate, we needed every Democrat to pass it. Two conservative Democrats, West Virginia's Joe Manchin and Arizona's Kyrsten Sinema, both of them heavily financed by corporate interest, undermined our efforts at every turn. Because of their obstruction, the process dragged on for months. Momentum for change stalled, people lost hope. A year after the enactment of the American Rescue Plan, the Build Back Better bill died, and with it, much of the political support that President Biden and the Democrats had won. A year after the passage of the American Rescue Plan, Biden's approval rating had dropped by 20 points. Economic rights are human rights. One of the fundamental and ongoing debates in politics has to do with the role of government. Let me start that again. One of the fundamental and ongoing debates in politics has to do with the role that government should play in our lives, and that discussion must necessarily involve the issue of human rights. Stated simply, in a democracy and a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, what are citizens entitled to as human beings? And how can government deliver those rights? In the long history of our country, the concept of human rights has gone through a radical evolution. We have lived through barbarism of slavery. We have lived through the brutal subjugation of Native Americans. We have lived through a democracy where wealthy white men had the right to vote. We have lived through hundreds of years when women were considered legally and socially as second-class citizens and were literally denied control over their own bodies. We have lived through periods of intense bigotry and hatred towards immigrants, and we have lived a long history in which it was illegal for gay couples to openly express their love for each other. We have also lived throughout our history with a profound separation between political rights and economic rights. Yes, our Constitution and Bill of Rights guarantees us the right to vote, the right to express our opinions, the right to practice our religious beliefs, the right to assemble, and many other important political rights. But they do not guarantee the right to a decent job, health care, education, food, and shelter. They do not guarantee us the right to the basic necessities that allow human beings to live decent and secure lives. In 1944, in a largely overlooked State of the Union address, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke about this contradiction. This republic had its beginning and grew to its present strength under the protection of certain inalienable political rights, among them the right of free speech, free press, free worship, trial by jury, freedom from unreasonable search and seizures. They were our rights to life and liberty. FDR explained, as our nation has grown in size and stature, however, as our industrial economy expanded, these political rights proved inadequate to assure us equality in the pursuit of happiness. We have come to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Repeat, true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Roosevelt was right when he made that statement almost 80 years ago. And the principle remains true today. Economic rights are human rights, and true individual freedom cannot exist without those rights. One of the greatest tragedies of modern American history is that we have not been able to implement Roosevelt's vision. Today, in our free country, 60% of our people live paycheck to paycheck, and real inflation-adjusted wages have not gone up for 50 years. Some 85 million of us are uninsured or underinsured, and 60,000 die each year because they don't get the medical care they need. We have the highest childhood poverty rate of almost any major country on earth, disproportionately among Black and brown families, and our child care system is a disaster. Higher education is increasingly unaffordable, and we lag behind many other countries in the academic achievements of our students. Millions of seniors lack the resources to heat their homes in the winter and buy the prescription drugs that they need. Meanwhile, while working families are falling further and further behind, the people on top have never had it so good. We now have more income and wealth inequality than ever before, with the richest 3 billionaires owning more wealth than the bottom half of our society, 165 million people. Today, the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92% of the CEOs of major corporations, earn 400 times what their employees make. In our rigged economy, we also have more concentration of ownership and price fixing than ever before. In one sector after another, we see a handful of giant corporations controlling the market. Shockingly, there are now 3 Wall Street firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, that control assets of over $20 trillion and are major shareholders in almost every major corporation in this country, including the largest financial institutions in the country, media, transportation, agriculture, and manufacturing. For a New America. This book, however, is not a critique of modern American society and the uber capitalism that shapes our lives. It offers a blueprint for progressive change, both economic and political. It calls for a political revolution in which working people come together to fight a government that represents all Americans, not just the 1%. It embraces Roosevelt's belief that the U.S. government must guarantee economic rights to all of its people. Yes, we can have guaranteed job programs that puts people to work at livable wages, addressing the enormous unmet needs of our society. And we can move toward economic democracy in which workers have more and more power over the jobs they perform, so they no longer have to function as unhappy cogs in the machine. Yes, we can create millions of jobs by leading the world in combating the existential threat from fossil fuels and towards energy efficiency and sustainable energy. We can rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, roads, bridges, rails, schools, water systems, and broadband as we make our nation safer and more efficient. Yes, we can put an end to our dysfunctional healthcare system and move towards a publicly funded Medicare for all system that guarantees healthcare as a human right, not a privilege. Yes, we can guarantee lifetime learning through free public education for every American of every age as we create the best educational system in the world from childcare to graduate school. Yes, we can end our grotesque level of income and wealth inequality through a progressive tax system that demands that the wealthy and large corporations finally start paying their fair share of taxes. Yes, we can preserve reproductive rights and guarantee that women have the freedom to make the choices that are best for their lives and their livelihoods. Yes, we can end all forms of bigotry as we move towards a society that truly embraces the wonderful words learned as children. America is a land with freedom and justice for all. Yes, we can create a vibrant and inclusive democracy that ends our corporate campaign finance system and makes it easier, not harder, for all people of all walks of life to participate in the political process. During the last years of his life, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke with increasing passion about how the struggle for civil rights had evolved into a class struggle. Speaking in 1967 at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta, the Nobel Prize recipient said, "Capitalism forgets that life is social, and the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor in the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. To achieve that higher synthesis," Dr. King explained, "one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system that a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. That's what this book does." Thank you for following my stream this evening, and we'll see you next time for Chapter 1, Not Me, Us. Good evening.
What are you doing?
Making a live stream.
Oh.